Welcome to another episode of EMF Warriors, a podcast where we share the latest research and cutting-edge information on everything to do with electromagnetic fields. Solution-focused interviews, including genuine real-life stories of people affected by harmful EMFs and how they have fully recovered from their debilitating symptoms. So sit back, relax, and get ready to enjoy another episode of EMF Warriors.
G'day listeners, welcome to another episode of EMF Warriors. My name's Jason Bawden-Smith and I'm your co-host tonight with part B of our discussion with the founders. David, are you with us?
I am, Jason. G'day, how you going?
Fantastic, thanks for coming back for part two of this amazing discussion we're having. And Scott, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. How's it going?
Yeah, great. Yeah, this is really good. The first part was amazing, and I think we'll continue the energy and answer the rest of the questions that we have here. I apologise for not mentioning all the names of the people who asked questions, but I just thought it'd be easy for us to talk in a conversational style and walk through all the issues that everyone's raised on Facebook and via email. So, David, we kind of spent most of the time talking about power, electricity. We went into a light discussion and a couple of other issues. So let's get back to cabling. So we've got the power in the house. What should we do, one, with the existing electrical cabling that we have in our house that could be causing problems? And if they are, can we retrofit the cabling? Or maybe we go through a new house and design a house with new cables so we can actually set it up to have as low DE as possible.
Well, it depends on the structure, but it doesn't matter what house you go into or look at, you can always improve on it. So you can look at the existing cabling, even if it's solid concrete and you can't run new cables. There's always ways of disconnecting certain circuits that you don't need, or converting certain lighting circuits going through the concrete where you convert that to DC. And there's all sorts of shortcuts you can take to make your house a more EMF friendly environment. My favourite house is a concrete apartment because it blocks out all of the EMFs from outside, and any electrical cables going through the walls are instantly, all the electric fields go straight to ground. So if you live in a concrete apartment, you don't really have electric field issues unless you've got earthing issues. But most of the time, the apartments I measure and the upper market high-end homes, which are all concrete, they really don't have any electrical field issues. My main concern is the listeners and the EMF warriors who live in the typical wooden structured home where you've got wooden floors, a tin roof, and you've got power cable under the floor, power cable above the roof, above the ceiling. You've got power cables running through the walls, concealed. You can't see them, but they're there, and they're emitting, going through your mattress and beds. What I like to do when I go into a house is look at what circuits I can pull out. So if you can just have the main power running to your office, so you've got your computer gear, your living room, you keep that going with the entertainment equipment, and the kitchen, you can tidy that up, make sure that's reasonably clean as far as EMFs go. But with bedrooms, ideally, I like to disconnect the cable runs that go to the bedrooms. And if you've got lighting cable in the ceiling and a low ceiling, then you really need to be disconnecting the electricity. Raked ceilings are really good. Raked ceilings, because they're raked ceilings and high ceilings are really good as far as electric fields go, because you've got that massive distance between your head or your bed, so you don't have ultra high electric fields. But most old homes are horrendous for having high body voltages. Like, so you got really high elevated levels of electric fields in these older styled homes, and especially in some of these typical Queenslander homes we have here, with kit set homes, $300,000, $400,000 homes, and they're very small 3x4 or 4x5 rooms, and you've got power cables underneath the floors, power cables in the walls, above the ceilings, and they're electrified Faraday cages. So that's the first thing I address. You don't. Too many people just go and rush out and buy meters and filters and think, yep, right, I'll clean it up. That's the wrong way to approach it. The first thing you've got to do when it comes to cleaning up your environment, as far as EMFs go, is eliminating the EMFs at the source. So that starts at disconnecting power runs at the power board. Even if you're renting, it doesn't take too much to get an electrician in to come in and just disconnect a few power runs that go to the bedroom and isolate lighting cables that go over the bedrooms. But I'm really big on working on bedrooms and getting their electric fields basically to a minimum, and if possible, removing all power cables to them. Now, another issue is when you're renovating or building, people need to look at how they're running these power cables. Now, up until probably 5 or 6 years ago, I forgot when the regulations changed, but electricians would just throw the electrical cables over the roof where they had to go. So they'll be in the ceiling and the cables were literally thrown. These, especially in renovations. Because I was up in the ceilings running speaker cables and data cables and antenna cables, I would see what electricians do. And you'd have hundreds of power cables just being thrown everywhere. And then on some homes, you've also got the insulation on top, which is alloy. And you've just got this massive EMF disaster zone. So when you're building or renovating, if you can place some cable trays up in the ceiling, off the ceiling, up as high as possible, have the cable tray earthed, and have a central point where all your power cables go down and channel off that. Just having your power cables in the power tray with the power tray earthed eliminates so many electric fields. And from there, you can even have DC transformers going from there to DC lights to different rooms. But there's so many shortcuts and so many ways you can improve on EMFs if you just take a little bit of time with planning your renovations or homes. So a lot of architects, if they just sat down with someone who understands EMFs, it wouldn't take them too long for the penny to drop and think, shoot, this is so easy to build into my clients' homes, and really roll out some clean designs where you're talking about having ultra low EMFs. I really believe there's a huge market just waiting to be tapped into, where we've got architects and builders marketing low EMF homes. There was a movement in Australia about 10 or 15 years ago that started doing it, but it's too early. We're at a point now where, because we've got such dirty electricity, we've got so many smart meters and digital electronics cutting up the sine wave, that we're at a tipping point where we definitely have to do something with the way we look at wiring our homes. I mean, we shouldn't even have AC power, because, I mean, AC power is the problem. It's not dirty electricity. It's not the harmonics. Electricity is the issue, the AC. So that's what we were talking about before, having DC, AC solutions.
Yeah. And for those who miss part A or the first half of this show, need to press pause now and go back and listen to that, because we go into deep detail on dirty electricity and all things power. So David, is there any particular cable that we need to use for the wiring? And also, what do you think of dimmer switches?
Okay, power cabling. Our power cable, I mean, there's different size power cabling. And because today's electronics don't use that much power, we don't have a problem with overloaded circuitry so much. I did see it about 3 or 4 years ago, 5 years ago. We had a lot of houses running plasmas and a lot of electronics, and circuits were overloaded, so the filters weren't working. But you get 2.5 mil flex commercial grade power cable. If you use something like that, you can't go wrong. So if in doubt, just go for the better quality commercial grade. If everyone treated their homes a bit more like a commercial building, you'd be much better off, because commercial electricians do a much better job than most consumer electricians that I know. But as far as using cables, power cables pretty straightforward. They all have the neutral, positive, and earth. And you've got the options of purchasing the really expensive shielded power cabling, but I don't know anyone forking out the money to do that, because that's a lot of money. You're better off using cable trays and designing a system which eliminates the EMFs by the way you run the cables, because I mean, looking at thousands of dollars to upgrade to a shielded power run.
Yeah.
And dimmer switches, what do you think of dimmer switches?
Well, dimming switches cause huge amounts of dirty electricity. They're not a problem in DC systems where we've got DC lighting. You can just flick between different voltages and there's no problems. Another thing is the DC lighting has got shielded DC cable, so there's no problems when it comes to dimming DC lighting. But with the electricity, with alternating current, when you dim alternating current and turn that knob up and down, and you look at your dirty electricity meter, or even listen to it, say with a eSmog Spinion, you actually hear a horrendous noise going well past 80,000 kilohertz, so right up into the megahertz. You can just actually hear the microwaves just being emitted. And then when you turn it off, it stops dead. So the easiest way to deal with a dimmer is to pull it out and put a standard switch in. It takes 5 minutes, and you can almost do it yourself.
Yeah, actually, I want to chime in here. Like, that's the first thing I did buying this new house, like 8 months ago, is I had an electrician come out and zap out like 6 of my dimmers in this home. This home was built in 1968, and it's funny. My home up in Seattle, in my main hallway, I had like 2 main dimmers, but it was feeding the lighting up above the hallway, and now I know that the hot and the neutral were separated up there in the top of the hallway. So every time I turned on that light that was connected to that dimmer that had that really far distance from the hot and the neutral, I would get a field that would extend like 30 feet long, 20 feet wide, and it would blast through the entire like office and my kids' room and part of the kitchen, and it would just flood the area with a giant magnetic field because of that separation. I suspect, and that's why I wanted to ask you, David, if I was probably correct in that assumption.
So your neutral was separate to the positive, is that right?
Yeah, like basically the way the lighting was done up in the ceiling, the lights were like there were multiple lights all through the hallway, and because I've seen up in that space that the hot and the neutral had like a distance to connect the lights between all the lights, so that separation of the hot and the neutral, I'm pretty certain it's created a giant magnetic field, and that's why I never used my hallway lights for that reason.
Yeah, that'll create a huge electric field. So as soon as you pull apart the neutral and the positive of a power cable, of an alternating current, it creates massive electric fields. So I actually haven't seen that before in a house, but that sounds terrible.
Yeah, not only, well, what's interesting is I went out to another person's house here just to help them out, and they had the same situation I had in my house in Seattle. And the very first thing walking into their house, I was getting really, really high electric fields of like, 60, 70 milligauss. And as I walked through their whole space, their space was worse than my house up in Seattle. And I kind of let them know that I suspect it was a hot neutral kind of situation like I saw in my home. I didn't know specifically, but that's what I suspected.
So you're getting like 60 to 70 VMs, volts per meter, or nanoteslas?
Milligauss. Milligauss, yeah.
Milligauss.
Yeah, milligauss.
Wow.
Yeah, it was big. It was huge. And I see this. I've seen this here in the U.S. in a lot of places where, like you said a few minutes ago, that some of the electricians do kind of this shoddy work, and they'll just throw stuff up there. And yeah, like not only it could be poorly shielded, I think in a lot of cases you could have this magnetic separate, or this hot to neutral separation. And it also makes me wonder what's going on just in the power grid, right? With if everything was installed commercially well.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I've gone into homes where the client is building a commercial shopping centre or a business, and he's building his house at the same time. This is quite common. And they use the same electricians and builders. And it's just amazing to see how well the job's done when it's done on a commercial level in a home, and how everything's, they cross their T's and dot their I's. Everything is so orderly. Everything's cable tied down. It's an art form, and you won't have these problems because it's done correctly. And it's all cable ties, it's all hung up correctly. We've got to really take this approach when using electric fields, alternating electric fields in homes.
Okay, let's move into a couple of rooms and discuss what most people don't realize are the dangers posed by appliances. Let's start with the kitchen. David, what's your opinion on the best stove? I don't imagine induction stoves are high on your list.
So the cooktops, they've got the induction systems, which are horrendous, especially the older ones. They've changed the regulations now, so they're not as bad as they were. But some of the old ones, up to a metre out, would emit extremely high magnetic fields. So any pregnant mums standing in front of the cooktops would be getting massive amounts of milligauss going through their stomach. And I measured you had to stand about a metre back, at least a metre, before you got to anywhere safe. And most mums stand right in front of it when they're cooking. And I had one of my customers buy a X-ray apron so that she could still use it when she was pregnant. So I'd highly recommend anyone who's got an induction cooktop to use a X-ray apron.
Yeah, that's pretty Superman stuff going on there.
And I know we all use gas for most of our cooking in our homes. Scott, you've tested a lot of other appliances in the kitchen. Like, we're smoothie crazy in Australia, so everyone's got a Vitamix or some blender, including me.
Yeah, I do too. I have a blender, and I kind of have this approach where when I turn it on for about a minute. I turn it on and jump back from it. And I'm like, 5 feet away. And of course, when somebody comes walking in the kitchen, I'm like, stand back. It's live. It's going to hit you. But no, I'm not that crazy about it. But yeah, the kitchen is like the worst hotspot in most houses, for me at least, what I've seen. It's like you've got toasters that are terrible. You've got can openers that put out huge fields. I mean, you wouldn't think a can opener would, but I think the can opener is the worst offender in my home. Then you've got, like the refrigerator, of course. In this particular home, kind of back off the side of the kitchen, I also have, that's where my water heater is, under the ground. So when that thing kicks on, I notice that it might go from 0.5 milligauss, and it might, kick up to 3 or 4 milligauss when that thing's on, if I'm standing at a certain point in the kitchen. So, and that's, and that thing's underneath the home, like several feet away, but I'm still getting that field coming from it. So, yeah.
And you might want, Scott, talk a little bit about the reason you stay 5 foot back from your Vitamix blender is because of the square root fall off. Do you want to explain what happens to fields? Yeah,
it's inverse square root fall off that typically, anything that has a motor at the source of the motor, and or just with a wire, you're going to have the strength of the field is going to be emanating at that point, and depending on the type of device you use, it might give off a stronger field or a weaker field, whether it be like the Vitamix or whatever you're running. If it's got a powerful motor source, like it could be a fan. Actually, some of the worst offenders I've measured have been just standard fans, like your $10 fan that you go down at the store and buy. Turn that on high, it could generate like a 5 or 6 foot field, because a lot of those are shielded poorly, or the way the motor is constructed is just really cheap and it's not shielded, and the materials contribute the materials could contribute to the field strength generation out from it. But yeah, I typically on the blender, I've measured it's around 5 feet on that. The can opener is actually more. The toaster's about 3 feet. The induction stove that I have in this home is actually about only 2 feet away, so it's a little less than a meter. And the induction stove I had up in my old Seattle home was an older one, and just like David's saying, that was like a meter and a half out. It was like 4 to 5 feet away. I was still in a pretty hefty field, it was like still 20 milligauss, 25 milligauss area. I actually took some videos and put them up on YouTube a long time ago of that particular stove that I measured, because it was so horrendous.
Wow. So you guys are actually seriously recommending an X-ray lead apron for pregnant women who spend a lot of time cooking with these modern appliances? You think that would be a wise move?
Well, I'm the cook basically here in my home, but yeah, I mean, for my ES that I have, I'm very mindful of when something's on. Like even right now, when I'm cooking my eggs in the morning, I'll first turn on the thing, throw the butter in, preheat it, and then go do other things away from it as that thing's heating up. And literally, when it gets super hot, I'll throw the eggs in and turn, only cook the one side of the eggs. Then after the one side has been cooked, I'll turn it off completely because there's so much heat coming out of the stove. Then the other side of the eggs cook all the way over the course of another 6-7 minutes. So I'll just like use the residual heat to cook my food just so I won't have the EMF and then still keep my egg yolks raw.
Another issue with measuring these induction cooktops is some meters aren't capable of measuring the frequencies that they're putting out. So the magnetic fields being emitted from the cooktop around the megahertz, it can some meters will not actually pick it up. So you'll get quite close to a measure and think, oh, yeah, it's fine, it's all good. But you need a high-end Gauss meter to measure these induction cooktops. Otherwise, you won't actually pick anything up. So there are some meters where you can go up and measure them and not pick up anything.
Okay, we'll talk about meters in a minute. I just want to move into the living or lounge room where a lot of time's spent watching TV. What's your recommendation for the best TV or the worst TV as well, Dave?
Okay, the best TV are the new OLED TVs. So they don't use much power and they don't create only probably about 10 to 20 GS units of dirty electricity, whereas the old LCD TVs could produce anywhere up to 400 GS units. And the plasma screens, they used to go up to around about 1,500 GS units. Like I used to see 42-inch plasma screens producing up to 800 to 1,000 GS units. That when I started selling the Stetson meters and measuring televisions, I actually realized that one particular brand that I was selling engulfed the entire house with dirty electricity up to around 1,500 GS units. And I looked at all the customers, and they were all my customers that had these TVs were all sick, all had some serious health issues. And I don't like talking about it because it's quite a sensitive subject, because a lot of the customers, they wouldn't assume me when I pointed out that the TVs were putting out harmful microwaves in their living room. But then we put the filters in, we fixed it. But it was touch and go. And that was back in probably 2011, 2012. And that's when I realized I had to start taking more responsibility in what I was putting in people's homes. And even when I put Wi-Fi systems in, I cranked them right down. So I'm now very wary of what TVs and technology I put in there. Like, fortunately, these new LED TVs, it doesn't matter if it's an 80-inch or 100-inch, they still use next to no electricity compared to the old 42-inch and 50-inch TVs. Now, another thing with plasma screens is when you're sitting in front of them, even 2 meters out, you're getting hammered with all sorts of frequencies right up into the megahertz. And once again, a lot of meters won't measure that because a lot of EMF RF meters have a gap between the RF range and the low frequency. That's why I spent the extra money, so I've got no gaps and I can measure between 1 hertz right up to 3 gigahertz. Now, if you can't afford to spend thousands of dollars on spectrum analyzers and meters that do measure the plasma TVs up in the megahertz, that's where the eSmog Spinion comes in, which is a radio meter. It's a meter which allows you to listen to the EMF instead of measuring it, because sometimes numbers don't really mean much, whereas a sound can tell you a whole story. But the plasmas used to get missed a lot, even by a lot of building biologists, because their meters wouldn't go into that range. They would miss some of the LCD computer monitors and some of the plasma screens. But children sitting in front of a plasma screen, they were getting hit with dirty electricity in most cases, and all the frequencies coming off the television, including the blue light, including a light flicker, the whole thing. Fortunately, we don't have to worry about that today because the new TVs don't have that problem. However, that said, there's still people today who are using these secondhand and old plasma screens that have children sitting in them right in front of them. And even if you've got a Cornet 88T, it's not going to measure these fields coming from the plasmas. It's kind of like a gap. So yeah, plasma screens, I'm just so glad they've gone. And I can't wait for a lot of other technologies to move on as well, like AC power, but we're not there yet. But anyway, so yeah, plasma screens, get rid of them or stand right back from them, measure the dirty electricity, put a Stetzer filter next to where it plugs into the power, because they do emit higher levels of dirty electricity.
Excellent. That's fantastic information. Many people wouldn't know that. Scott, you've got some experience with gaming consoles. So the old Wii and Xbox and all the other gaming consoles. What did you decide to do after you found they were just too high in RF emissions with your gaming systems?
All right, yeah, that's a really good question, Jason. Basically, for a lot of the consoles that are out there, they're all going to emit a lot of radio frequency. Now, there's a few of them out there that I'm not going to really name that actually emit a lot of radio frequency to the point that I can't even use them. If I were to use them for more than 10 minutes, I'd start getting spots in my eyes, and I know that's really bad in my case. But also for my kid, of course, he likes to play games from time to time, and what I'll do is I have this like aluminum kind of like, it's like a plastic, I call it like kind of like a clear plastic bookcase, not bookcase, but like kind of like a book sleeve. And I have a piece of aluminum in there, and it's actually quite large. And I put that in front of the consoles. So if he does play, he actually hasn't played now for quite a while, but when he does play in the past on the consoles, I was at least able to back block some of the radio frequency out of his space by kind of that little bit of a hack. But it really wasn't that great because everything's gone wireless controllers now, so it's actually hard for the newer consoles to get wired controllers for them. Now I think you can like kind of off the market a little bit, or like at other places, and you could still hook up wired controllers to things. But for the most part, even the wired controllers have gyros in them, and when they spin for like rumbling, it will actually generate a field on your hand, like a magnetic field on your hand. So I've actually done some interesting stuff. As I've even pulled apart some controllers and just thrown away the gyros that are in them, so there's no ability for them to rumble. But then I got thinking about, I'm like, why am I going to all this effort for the console stuff? I mean, there are some exclusive games that you can only play on consoles. So, but for the most part, a lot of games are now available on PC, on different places you can get them on PC. So I have wired controllers going to my PC if you need to play like using a wired controller game. But most games offer keyboard options as well. And I've, at least with my son's space, for him and myself, I've really secured the PC really well, to the point where when I'm regularly just online on Facebook, what you see me on my Facebook a lot, I'm in a very secured space. I know there's no body voltage in the area, or it's quite minimal. All the fields are very reduced. Like in the last video I was talking about, I'm buying the chokes for everything, so I get even more benefit of the sine wave, more smoothness. I already have like the aluminum tape around a lot of my stuff, so like at least in all my more basic measurements, my space is really clean in comparison to other gamers, like for the EMF side of stuff. And then it's just, for parents, it's a matter of limiting time. They get certain windows of time where they can play, and you got to be more mindful. Like, at least with my son, I'm more mindful not letting him play stuff and do stuff online, especially in the evening, just to match up the circadian. If you're going to play games and you're electrosensitive, it's better you do it earlier in the day, and like you have a bunch of light, sunlight shining into your home as well, if you have a clean space.
What I've done with my son is I've told him that there's no gaming after sundown. So, and I do that with my daughter as well. I said, after sundown, we're winding off the technology. And if we are using the technology, we're using it with the screens facing a open window. So you've got the natural sunlight coming in and washing out the light flicker coming from the computer screens. And I also make sure that the monitors that they're using, the lighting's back down to match the lighting in the room. Because too often you go into children's rooms and they've got these monitors on full brightness in a dark room, which would just must hammer their biology.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, they're way more sensitive to all this, and it goes into a lot of aspects of the biology, but absolutely, like the penetration of potential fields coming into them, just their biomass, the hydration levels, like that's the other thing, is I like hammer drinks on a continual basis into my kid, just to know that he's staying more hydrated, and he's adapted over the last couple of years. And all of his ES has gone away, which is wonderful. After I actually regrounded my home, it was like 3 months ago, and he was occasionally still getting these hot ear problems from electrosensitivity from time to time at certain times of the day, especially like right around 5 to 7 p.m. range, where there's a lot of power usually running through neighborhoods. I noticed it was just in that window of time, typically when I could even just put my, tri-field on and notice that it went, up. I could detect a higher field in the area going up, and instead of being more in the 0 milligauss range, it was kicking in more, and bam, all of his hot ear problems have been gone for the last 3 months.
Well, my daughter's, she's just turned 14, but she's electrosensitive, and she is only sensitive to Wi-Fi when she's exposed to electromagnetic fields or electric fields in the megahertz range, which is basically the microwave field. It's basically RF. So whenever she was around a plasma screen and there's Wi-Fi around, or she was in a classroom with low-lying fluorescent lights, she would get heart palpitations. No. But if you have just the Wi-Fi on its own with no electric fields, she was all right. So it's quite interesting how you get combinations that set off certain individuals.
No, it's true. Like, there's been that video going around recently about the smart meters and about how you can measure different erratic heart rhythms. So maybe that's a good segue, Jason, about talking more a little about smart meters here.
I think we'll get the smart meters towards the end. I'd like to stay in the rooms if we can. I know we'd like to move around, but we can talk about Wi-Fi routers. Most of us know already that we don't want any Wi-Fi routers, and there's absolutely zero wireless devices if we can help it. But for those who are desperate to have Wi-Fi in their home, there's a new Wi-Fi out from JRS Echo Wi-Fi, which claim, and I believe they're accurate, to reduce radiation levels by 90%. Basically, it just turns off emitting when it's not being used. So you can look them up. They're called JRS Echo Wi-Fi if you really need a Wi-Fi router. They're compatible, I think, with most telecommunication providers, and also available in Australia with a 240 volt connection. They're from Europe, like all these good EMF technology seems to come from.
There's also other types of wireless access points you can buy, and they're only like $100 per access point. And you can program them yourself through their interface, and it all operates on a cloud system, where you can take the RF output from, say, 400 millivolts, which is usually around about 400 millivolts to 200 millivolts is standard coming out of the box. But you can crank these things right down to 20 or 40 millivolts. So, and then set up schedules so they only come on at certain times of the day. So that's what I've done for customers of mine, is having these really low output wireless access points. They might have 4 or 5 wireless access points around the house, and they're scheduled to come on at certain times, and each one's individually adjusted as far as the millivolts goes. So it's a lot less stronger than most systems out of the box.
Excellent. You can also put a timer on your existing Wi-Fi router, so at least it turns off at night, because you don't need it at night.
Yep, exactly. Like, you just reminded me of a really cool little hack that I'd thought about with my dad, who lives kind of across the way. He was wondering, just like, he has Wi-Fi in his home, and he was like just concerned, and he went to a wired router and everything, but then he was concerned about, because he lives in like a neighborhood that's pretty close where there's a lot of houses around, he was wondering, well, heck, I don't know what I'm actually getting saturated with all my neighbors. So I told him to, he had a laptop, I told him to look for all your wireless connection points, just using your laptop to see how many other wireless connection points that you see coming in all around your neighborhood. And he did that, and he saw like 7 different points, all around him. So I think that was an interesting takeaway, that even with your computer, if you have the wireless on at the moment, you can see what the strength signaling of other wireless points that are actually getting into your space.
Okay, we've got to move along because we're going to run out of time. David, deck phones, DECT phones, the portable phones you use for landlines. They're no good, are they? You suggested a nice replacement for me. Do you want to talk about
Swiss Voice? Yeah, they make some good economical wireless phones. So basically, they don't emit wireless signals or RF until the phone rings. So if there's an incoming call, then they activate. Whereas most cordless phones are emitting wireless radiation 24/7. And the 900 megahertz phones and the 800 megahertz phones, they're the worst. I mean, they just go for up to 50 meters. I mean, we've got a big problem with our neighbour's phone. And Swiss Voice ones have these eco modes. There's a couple other manufacturers out there that make them as well, but the eco mode enables you to use a cordless phone without emitting microwaves 24/7. And even when it is working, it's got special technology where it's lower radiation than what most phones are.
Excellent. So let's talk a little bit about some appliances that I know my daughter loves to use, a hairdryer. And Scott, you might want to talk about the electric toothbrush issue that you have with your son. So what do you think about hairdryers, Dave? And then Scott, you can do toothbrushes.
Well, my daughter uses a hairdryer every 2 or 3 days. I'm not worried about the hairdryer scene. If she was using it twice a day for long periods, I would be concerned about it, especially now that we've got modulated signals riding on our power lines. It's trivial, and I don't get too paranoid about it. And because she doesn't use it every day, I'm not really too worried about it. And it doesn't give her heart palpitations. She doesn't seem to react to it like Wi-Fi. So she's not too sensitive, whereas in Scott's case, with his son, it'd be probably a completely different story.
Yeah, like with the toothbrush in the past, like when he was 6 years old, about a couple of years ago, a lot of times I just noticed this pattern. I had all these different, they were just battery powered toothbrushes, right? But he would hold it in his hand, like right at the source, and then use it in his mouth. And a lot of kids like him like to, like that feel of having it's kind of cool having this little vibration in the mouth, and it encourages them to brush their teeth. But I noticed always like 2 or 3 minutes after doing that, his eyes, he would complain about his eyes. He'd be like, my eyes feel all itchy. And he, for a good, like a half hour would pass before the itchiness would go away. And, after seeing this for a couple months, as a parent, you're like, okay, well, there's something about that toothbrush, right? So, I'm always, of course, for me, in my case, I'm like, well, it's, I'm going to measure this thing, and it's got a pretty hefty magnetic field coming off of it. And it, for him and his electrosensitivities, it just hits his eyes in such a way where it really can't, I had to go back to the manual toothbrush with him. And the very day I did that, and he'd started using the manual toothbrush, he never complained of having itchy eyes after that.
Wow, amazing. Okay, let's move into the bedroom, what I like to call the sleep sanctuary, when nothing should ever happen in that room except sleep and making love. So there's lots of gadgets in there that people don't need. The digital alarm clock. Scott, I know you measured a few of these with a few people, and David, I'm sure you've measured them as well. So let's go through the bedroom. You guys can talk about the digital alarm clock, what kind of mattresses, electric blankets, fans, anything else you're concerned about in the bedroom, and then we'll finish with some grounding issues.
I have to start off with fans. They're the ones that really shocked me when I started measuring bedrooms. RF can jump onto a metal roof or onto your lighting infrastructure, and it's just amazing how these fans that sit above your bed can just shoot down like a gun, like a beam. It's absolutely amazing just how RF can jump onto electrical cabling. But that was one of the most surprising things I've ever come across in the bedroom. Even deck phones, RF coming shooting down from a fan. And these signals that, like even in my case, I had a 900 megahertz signal coming out of my fan, and it was coming from 2 houses away, all because of the way that the neighbour's deck phone was sitting next to his metal guttering system. And anyway, the guttering systems on homes can really act as antennas. And RF and mixed with electric fields is not a good combination. And you can come up with absolutely any scenario And that's why it's so important to measure your bedrooms for electric fields, magnetic fields, and RF. And I just had to put that across because the fan is a really odd one. Then you go to the typical one where you've got the radio clock sitting next to the bed with a 2-core power cable coming from it, going straight into the mains. And when you've got 2-core power cable with no earth cable running next to it, you get massive electric fields, and those electric fields jump straight onto the mattress. So if you're sleeping on a sprung mattress, which used to be used as a makeshift World War II antenna, the electric fields coming from that 2-core power cable just jump straight onto the mattress and cause massive electric fields on your body. So you can change that lead and put a 3-core shielded power cable on it, and that'll fix that. Or just get rid of the alarm clock and use a battery operated one. I personally go for the option of removing all electrical fields and cabling. What's some more electrified issues we have in bedrooms? Spock?
I would say I think the most common thing that people have today would be having their smartphone next to their bed, using it as their alarm clock, and having it plugged in and charging in the middle of the night. That's probably the biggest offender I can think of at the moment. So then above that, like what you're saying with the 2-prong plugs, a lot of people will have their lamps like running, and usually running the wires right behind their bed, right, with the lamps.
That's right. Yeah, they do it with the lamps too. Same scenario. Get the 2-core power cable used on these lamps, and the power cords sometimes get plugged in behind the bed in some cases. And that power cord is only a couple of inches away from even steel framed beds or a mattress. And so in Australia, we've got 240 volts alternating current going through that mattress. And it's just amazing how high the body voltage can jump when you've got these 2-core power cables running next to your bed.
Yeah, it was interesting. Like, I also think about like some other things that are around in the room that are just not noticeable. And the first one that hits me is having, again, a meter, whether it's a gas meter that could be a new like RF, electrical gas meter, or a smart meter, or some other AC fan unit that's right outside the wall of where you're sleeping. And a lot of cases, in apartments especially, that there could be that going on, where you have, everything looks kosher and wonderful inside your home, but then just like a couple feet on the other side of the wall, there's some big offender, and you still might be sleeping in a pretty good magnetic field, something like that.
Yeah, I know of a case of where a guy lives and his neighbour, his bed backs onto his neighbour's kitchen, and he's got a microwave oven that sits right where his bed is, and he can measure the microwave when it's running. So there are random issues. I know that one lady, her bed backed onto where her kitchen was in the other area of the apartment, and she had an oven on the other side, which was causing 500 nanoteslas of magnetic fields.
Yeah, that's huge.
And she was wondering why she was getting so sick. And once again, everything else in her room was fine. No dirty electricity, no high electric fields, but just that one product sitting behind the wall in another room was just going straight through and engulfing half the bed.
Wow. Now, we've run out of time, which is unfortunate because I have so many more questions that the listeners have sent in. So, David, are you willing to come back and do a session on, there's 2 areas. One will be grounding, the earthing sheets, and the whole issue we have with grounding, including geopathic stress. And the other area, which is of major interest to me, is the Internet of Things, 3G, 4G, 5G, cell towers, and frequencies of the like. Are you willing to come back and help us out with that, Dave?
Absolutely. I'll be here.
I know you'll be, Scott. You're always first there, so you're like me.
Yeah, that'd be really amazing to hear David's thoughts on, again, a lot of the 5G stuff that we might not be aware of.
Yeah, we've got some ideas about 5G. Dave's changed my mind on a couple of things, and I'm not as concerned. I'm still very concerned. Let's not say that. I'm still extremely concerned. But I think the potential for making cities safer and more biologically designed is here now with the technology. And we'll go into detail in a few weeks. We'll see what other podcast interviews we have lined up, and we might do it soon or we might do it in a month or so. But David, thank you for your time. Your knowledge is amazing. Nothing like people who've been in the trenches, out there testing, doing this every day. And as much as I'm, upset that you are electrosensitive, it does help that you have that condition and you can talk from real experience. Scott, I love you, buddy. You're a genius, and keep up the good work. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I want to thank you again, David and Scott. And for now, we'll see you next time.
Thanks.
Yes. See you, Spot. See you, Jason.
Thank you for being part of the EMF Warriors community. We look forward to bringing you our next episode. Be certain to join in discussions on our EMF Warriors closed Facebook group. And make sure you subscribe to our fortnightly newsletter to stay up to date with global developments. If you would like to learn more about us, go to emfwarriors.com, where we have curated an amazing library of free information, resources, and solutions to your most pressing EMF concerns and needs. Because together, we can make a real difference. The materials and content discussed within this podcast are the opinions of host Jason Bawden-Smith and Scott Compton and guest interviews. This information is intended as general information only for listeners of this podcast. Listeners should always seek professional advice, and the content and opinions expressed in this podcast should never be construed as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. EMF Warriors.